All right, hello and welcome to today's webinar on how to grow your marketing budget in a recession. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As I go through the presentation, if you have any questions, please post those in the chat. We'll cover them at the end of the webinar. And after the webinar, I will send out the slides and the recording, the on-demand video for you to reference or to share with your team. And if you have any questions or want to provide feedback on the webinar, feel free to email me. My address will be at the end of the webinar and in the follow-up email that I'll send. A little bit about me. My name is Elizabeth Aaron, and I'm the Group Account Director and a partner at Brilliant Metrics. I've been working in marketing for more than 20 years with experience in a wide range of industries, including manufacturing, healthcare, SaaS, hospitality, and tourism. When I'm not leading our account team, I spend time with my husband, our two kids, and our lab, Rosie, exploring our hometown of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A little bit about Brilliant Metrics. We are a digital-first agency serving the B2B market. Marketing leaders come to us when they want to grow their team's capabilities, knowledge, or technology to drive greater results and impact. Today, we're going to talk about growing your marketing budget in a recession. We'll start with a review of past company performance and how some of the world's most successful brands have marketed through economic downturns. We'll take a look at what all of the successful post-recession brands have in common and the strategies that you'll want to incorporate in your recession plan to maximize long-term ROI. We'll walk through key points in making the case to maintain or even grow your marketing budget. And finally, we'll discuss where to prioritize resources if you are asked to make a budget cut. By the end of this webinar, you'll have the data to support why retaining or even growing your marketing and advertising budget will increase your company's share of voice now, so you can increase market share when the economy recovers. All right, let's dive in. So the first question we need to answer, are we really headed into a recession? According to the Q3 measure of CEO confidence survey from the Conference Board, almost every chief executive in the United States is getting ready to face an economic downturn in the next 12 to 18 months. According to the survey, CEO confidence has eroded to lows last seen during the Great Recession. The good news, it is anticipated to be a mild recession. Morgan Stanley says that the inflation-driven recession is likely to be shallower and less damaging to corporate earnings than recent downturns. And they cite a few different reasons for this. The first one is that it's inflation-driven recession, where historically the damage to corporate earnings has been more modest than in credit-driven recessions. There's also several economic factors that are indicating a less severe recession than we've seen in previous periods. People are still spending. Auto industry is still strong. The housing market, although it's taken a dip, is still going strong. There's a strong job market indicating that companies are more likely to reduce their open job postings rather than laying people off, and that's going to lead to a delay to the hit in unemployment rate. Corporate balance sheets are strong, and capital spending in areas like energy, infrastructure, automation, and national defense are not typically linked to rising interest rates, and so they anticipate that spending will continue there. All of that combined with corporate revenues being more durable as companies have found new revenue streams to expand. The CEOs in the survey agree 85% are expecting a brief and shallow recession. So far, these CEOs do not seem to be experiencing recessionary conditions. In fact, according to the study, 3/4 of CEOs say demand has risen or held steady over the past 3 months. So, are we in a recession? In the last few months, politicians, economists, and market professionals have engaged in a great semantic debate over whether or not the US economy is in a recession. The argument, usually influenced by politics, comes down to how you define the word recession. And according to the definition, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product. Based on this definition, 2 consecutive quarters, the US entered a recession in the summer of 2022. And we all know what that means. In the face of a recession, businesses immediately look to cut costs. We've all been around long enough to know that marketing and advertising are often the first items on the chopping block. After all, it's a lot easier to cut an advertising budget than it is to lay someone off. However, what decision makers fail to realize is that companies who curtail their marketing efforts during an economic downturn will actually end up jeopardizing their long-term market share. Peter Field, a renowned British marketing consultant and researcher, and someone that you're going to become very familiar with by the end of this webinar, said, "You may not think a recession is a time of sunshine, but if you've got the resources and you hold your nerve, it's a great time." In the next few slides, we're going to look at the combination of research and real-life examples that shows why doubling down on marketing during a recession is one of the best tactics to impact bottom-line long-term growth. Economic downturn after economic downturn, we have real-life examples of what happens to brands when they invest in marketing and when they don't. So let's take a look. We'll start with the Great Depression. In the late 1920s, two companies, Kellogg and Post, one I'm sure you're very familiar with, dominated the market for packaged cereal. Ready-to-eat cereal was still new to market at that time. Families were just getting used to this as an alternative to either oatmeal or cream of wheat. When the Depression hit, no one knew what would happen to consumer demand. Post did the predictable thing. They cut their budget in an effort to cut expenses, but Kellogg doubled its ad budget, moved aggressively into radio advertising, and heavily pushed its new cereal, Rice Krispies. By 1933, even as the economy bottomed out, Kellogg's profits had risen almost 30%. Nearly a century later, Kellogg's remains the category leader in dry cereal. Jumping ahead to the energy crisis, the US entered a 17-month recession from 1973 to 1976, I believe. In late 1973, the US government issued its first mile per gallon report, in which Toyota Corolla was second to Honda Civic in fuel efficiency. Toyota resisted the urge to drop their ad budget and instead stuck to their plan to build their brand and their products for the long haul. Toyota surpassed Volkswagen as #1 imported car maker in 1976, and they never looked back. Fast forward to 1990, and we're in another recession. To weather the storm, McDonald's decided to reduce its marketing spend and promotions budget. In contrast, Pizza Hut and Taco Bell took advantage of McDonald's reduced presence and focused their efforts on retaining their marketing activities. As a result, both the companies experienced higher sales, with Pizza Hut seeing an increase in 61% and Taco Bell an increase of 40%. Conversely, McDonald's, who had reduced their marketing spend, saw their sales decline by 28%. The next period of economic turmoil, the Great Recession. While past brands had focused on increasing their advertising spend, Amazon employed a different tactic. Like other brands, it did not cut its operating costs. Instead, it continued to innovate with new products despite the poor economy. They launched the Kindle, and that helped to grow their market share, and Amazon sales grew by 28% during the Great Recession. Amazon continued to innovate with new products during the slumping economy, most notably with Kindle products, which helped to grow market share. In a first, on Christmas Day 2009, Amazon customers bought more ebooks than printed books. As a result, in the minds of consumers, Amazon became an innovative company by introducing a lower-cost alternative to a cash-strapped consumer. There's plenty of evidence regarding the advantages of advertising during a recession, but the downside of underinvestment is less well known. British researcher Peter Field used the Institute of Practitioners Advertising case study database to provide insights about how brands coped with the global recession in 2008 and 2009. He looked at the impact of excess share of voice on campaigns that were in market during the recession versus those in market 2 years before or 2 years after. Peter found that those campaigns that had a strong, positive excess share of voice during the recession performed better than in non-recession periods. This graph shows market share growth broken out by share of voice prior to the recession and after the recession. To understand the data, let's consider 3 scenarios. The first company, Company A, had 15% market share before the recession. When the recession hit, they panicked. They completely cut their marketing budget. Throughout the recession, they had no advertising and no share of voice, and they fell into column A, keeping only 46% of their market share. Post-recession, they had dropped down to less than 7% market share. Company B also had 15% of the market share before the recession. However, they decided to maintain their spending. Due to falling media costs, they were able to increase their share of voice despite spending the same amount on advertising. During the recession and the 2 years following the recession, Company B's ads made up 20% of every impression in their industry. This means that they had 5% excess share of voice, which put them in the middle column, and they left the recession with about 88% of the market share. By the end of the recession, Company B had about 13.2% of the market. Despite advertising, they had still lost market share. Finally, Company C. They also had 15% market share prior to the recession. But where their competitors maintained or even cut back, they invested. They took 25% of all of the ad impressions in the industry. This put them in the third column with 10% excess share of voice. As a result, they retained 167% of their initial marketing investment. 2 years after the recession, Company C had increased their market share from 15% pre-recession to 25% post-recession. They all started with the same market share before the recession, but their activities during the recession impacted their performance after the economy had recovered. Not only is there a substantial difference in market share before and after the recession, but Peter Field observed that turning off advertising in response to an economic crisis poses a significant risk that can take up to 5 years for brands to recover from. A recession isn't all bad. It's an opportunity to leapfrog your competition. Recessions give companies that are ready to take a risk a chance to take advantage of the changing market. If you're smart about it and you can pick up competitors' lost market share, you can come out bigger in the end. The key? A strong marketing and advertising program to catch what your competitors let slip. History has proven this. Companies that increase marketing in a recession are proven to do better than their competitors in the long run. So, how do you avoid wasting a good recession? As we face uncertain economic conditions, the message is simple. Don't panic, pivot. The brands that we studied didn't cut their marketing budgets, but they did change how and where they were spending their money in the recession. And this is a key point. They didn't cut their marketing budgets. They reallocated where they spent that money. As an organization, there may have to be budget cuts, but they made sure they retained their marketing budgets. As a result, they had a 5-time improvement in their business, they had a 4.5-time annual market share growth, and they had strong profitability during the recovery period. Those that didn't invest, those that panicked, felt the repercussions for years after the recession was over. The first thing to do is to focus on the long term, not just the short term. When sales start to decline, companies shouldn't panic and alter their brand's fundamental proposition or positioning. The best course is to stabilize the brand by reinforcing the core brand proposition. Be careful not to sacrifice long-term brand building for short-term promotional strategies. When the recession is over, and remember, this is anticipated to be a brief and shallow recession, you want the core value proposition that attracted your customer base to still be there, which leads to my second point. Defend your share of voice. There is a strong relationship between share of voice and market share. The data we reviewed earlier from Peter Field reinforces this. When brands cut advertising spend in a recession and allow their share of voice to fall below market share, there are significant implications. The study found that brands that slash ad presence can expect a 5-year recovery period and major loss in profit in that recovery. Turning that advertising spigot back on post-recession is expensive, and brands have a really hard time regaining what they lost. In fact, maintained or increased marketing spend brings short-term hits to profitability during the recession, but much stronger growth to profitability in that recovery. The good news is defending your market share doesn't necessarily mean having to spend more money. There are brands that are going to cut their marketing budgets and reduce their advertising spend. History has proven this time and time again. Historically, the cost of share of voice falls during a recession. Take advantage of that reduction in ad costs that comes when there's a decrease in competition. There's an opportunity here for lower cost growth than in normal economic times. For prolonged success, you're going to need to connect with your audience. Past recessions have shown that ads about humanity and community performed better than those that are self-serving. Use this as an opportunity to build and nurture relationships by providing value to your audience. Adapt to their needs. Reinforce the value you bring as a trusted partner. And finally, the companies that were most successful in past recessions innovated. Yes, we have the story of Amazon that introduced the Kindle and exceeded all sales records, but we're not just talking about product innovations. Innovations to services and even processes can have a positive impact on the bottom line. To see how economically troubled times can be used to an advantage, McKinsey studied the performance of 1,000 mainly industrial companies in the United States during an 18-year period, specifically from 1982 to 1999, which included the recession of 1990 to 1991. The graph shows the change in the market-to-book ratio, which is a financial valuation that measures the company's current market value relative to its book value. Companies that retained or gained market leadership during the 1990 to 91 recession didn't cut their budgets. They actually spent more. This included strategic acquisitions, but they also focused their spending on selling, general and administrative expenses to take advantage of competitive opportunities. And this, in fact, this was probably the most dramatic finding of the study and the least expected response. While most companies tightened their belts, successful leaders traded their short-term profitability for long-term gain, and they refocused their advertising spend rather than cutting back. These companies emerged from the recession stronger and more highly valued than they were before the economy tanked. You can see this in the difference in improvements in the market-to-book ratio from pre-recession to recession for the companies that took the risk and spent money when everyone else was cutting back. In the studies we reviewed, a lot of the successful brands increased their marketing spend. So does this mean that everyone should maintain or increase their budget? Definitely not. A recession means a decline in sales, and as a rule, we should reduce our marketing spend. The exception to this rule has to do with how effective our marketing is. If the additional investment increases the effectiveness of our marketing, then the additional spend is worth it. So how do we increase the effectiveness of our marketing? When a recession hits, there's 3 things that can happen. The same budget gets you higher share of voice as your competitors cut back. The same budget gets you more impressions as the cost per impression drops, or your brand's offering is especially appealing. If you're presented with any one of these opportunities, take advantage. Find the budget wherever you can. This is going to benefit you in the long run. As I said before, successful companies don't panic, they pivot. Regardless of the budget, if it's more or if it's less, there are 6 key areas that need to be addressed in your recession marketing strategy. They include customer research, R&D, segmentation, communication and messaging, prices and promotions, and paid advertising. So it all starts with customer research. Customers change their behavior in a recession, and sometimes these changes can last long after the recession is over. The first step is to gain an understanding of this change and what it means for your brand. When evaluating marketing tactics and strategies, you need to understand your customers' priorities. How are they reallocating budgets? How are they redefining value? This could also mean reevaluating the brands that they've always worked with or bought from. Brands that accompany their customers on this new and different journey and who shift their marketing message and re-engineer their value proposition to meet the new needs of their customer base will come out ahead of their competition that maintain the same messaging or even cut it all together. Another area to consider allocating budget to in a recession is R&D, specifically around new product launches. Investment in R&D has been shown to have a stronger impact over long-term performance than any other category during a recession. This is because maintaining R&D means companies emerge from the recession with a relatively stronger pipeline. In addition, research has found that the products launched during a recession have both a higher long-term survival rate and higher sales revenue. Part of this is because traditionally there are fewer product launches in a recession. However, another factor may be that companies are going to focus their R&D on the products that have the best chance of success, which means the products being launched are of higher quality or better meet customer needs. Even if you don't have products ready to bring to market now, you want to continue to invest in R&D throughout the recession. As part of the pivot, you'll want to audit your current segments and targeting to focus on areas of opportunity. Laser-focused targeting is essential. It allows you to avoid wasted spend. While the methods and technologies you use can impact this, it all starts with your segmentation. You may need to change who you're targeting, possibly even limiting your reach to one specific niche. Keep an eye on the data to see if new purchasing patterns emerge or if there's new opportunities to splice your segments. But don't forget your current customers. Your loyal client base is one of your best assets heading into a recession. They're cheaper, easier, and more effective to market to, and they're already familiar with your product. There are very cost-effective ways to reach these people. Email programs and programmatic brand nurturing programs both allow you to stay in front of them for a relatively low cost. In a recession, communication has to change, and not to match the somber and depressing tone of a recession, but to meet the needs of your customers that are looking for something positive to hold on to. Successful brand advertising not only shows emotion, but it injects a little humor while letting the customer know, we're here for you. This is how we can help. Take the case of Coca-Cola. In 2020, Coca-Cola used its advertising budget to showcase the work of frontline workers, creating these little mini stories about unsung heroes. The Coca-Cola brand features in the background of these messages, reminding consumers that Coca-Cola always has been and always will be there for you in good times and in bad. A study by the World Advertising Research Center found that advertising campaigns that focused on emotional engagements turned out to be more profitable than campaigns that prioritize transactional messages, such as special offers or discounted prices during difficult time. If you find that you can convey the same brand messaging and your core values have remained the same and your value proposition has remained the same, you may still want to conduct a brand audit just to make sure that nothing controversial or insensitive is on your website or blog, in emails, or on your social media profiles. Price and promotion. You want to resist the urge to increase prices to maintain revenue and margins. Recessions make people price sensitive. This is true for both B2C and B2B. If your consumers are price sensitive and you can stomach the lower margin of a price cut, this might be an option for you. But keep in mind, while this might help you during the recession, consumers tend to be more upset when you return to the regular price post-recession. On the opposite side, it's not hard to see why increasing prices to maintain revenue and margins is a bad idea. Any increase in price will further reduce the likelihood of making a sale. In the past, when brands have tried this and it hasn't worked, they've turned to short-term discounts. And while that seems like a temporary decrease in price would drive some sort of urgency among your target audience, studies have shown that this fluctuation on price actually hurts overall market share. Your pricing strategy must depend on the market. Price promotions are most effective and received more favorably when the market as a whole is in a growth mindset, meaning they're open to exploring new products. They understand that it's a promotion and they don't get upset when there's a return to a regular price, which they very well may be able to afford when the economy recovers. In contrast, when unemployment increases, the market tends to shift towards a prevention focus, and a price cut has less of an impact on your sales lift. In a recession, short-term activation may seem like a quick and easy way to drive sales, but it isn't always the best long-term option. I've talked a lot about the benefit of staying in market, but I'm going to say it again because it really is important. When marketers cut back on their ad spend, the brand loses its share of mind with customers. Losing share of mind means a loss in current and possibly even future sales. In addition to the benefits of market share, there are several other reasons to advertise during an economic slowdown. The noise level in a product category can drop when competitors cut back on their ad spend, and it allows advertisers to reposition a brand or introduce a new product at a much lower cost. Brands can project to the consumer the image of corporate stability during challenging times. And like I mentioned before, the cost of advertising typically drops during a recession. The lower rates create a buyer's market for brands. Here's an interesting case study, and apologies, but I do not know if I'm saying this company name right, but Reckitt Benckiser Group manufactures health, hygiene, and home products. In 2009, following the 2008 financial crash, they launched a marketing campaign that was targeted at explaining to consumers why it made sense to purchase their more expensive products. While competitors were cutting their marketing, Reckitt increased their advertising spend by 25%. As a result, they grew their revenue by 8% and their profits by 14%, while most of their competitors were reporting declines of 10% or more. Brand building is not all about now. It's about ensuring that next year's sale targets are easier to achieve than this year's. So we've just covered the 6 key areas to focus on to maximize your return on marketing dollars during a recession. However, there's something else I want you to think about as you plan your recession strategy. The McKinsey study and even Field's study found that companies that spent money during the recession were stronger. But I would be remiss not to note their position before the recession. Companies that are already in a strong financial position are going to feel a lot more confident spending than those in a weaker position. Stronger companies are going to grow during tough times, while weaker ones are going to shrink, regardless of their marketing spend. When determining what risk your organization can manage, think about your position in the following areas. What's your trajectory of market share? If you're the market leader and you pause advertising, what competitor who's been nipping at your heels is going to come take advantage? Or are you the competitor that can maintain advertising and take some of their market share? Look at your supply chain and your labor force. Can they support the recession? If not, focusing on brand maintenance with your current customer base may be your best option. Take a look at your internal operations. Being able to make small but deliberate changes in how decisions are made can have a huge impact on efficiency and set the stage for long-term growth. Is your organization set up for this type of decision making? On another note, take a look at your marketing org chart. Are there steps you can take to recession-proof your marketing department to find new efficiencies, improve employee morale, or streamline the work to lay the groundwork for future growth? As you think about where to pivot, ask yourself, where are there opportunities and where are there threats? Opportunities to capitalize on disruption in the recession is an opportunity you want to keep an eye out for. 2 of the examples we looked at, Toyota and Amazon, both took advantage of market needs caused by the economic crisis. But keep in mind, Corolla was ranked as the 2nd most efficient vehicle during the energy crisis. That helped position them as a way for families to save money. But would they have been as successful if they hadn't made the list? What impact did making that list have on their decision to market? Looking at Amazon, they launched the Kindle in 2007, right when the Great Recession began. In the minds of consumers, Amazon became this super innovative company that introduced this lower cost alternative to a cash-strapped consumer. But in reality, that product had been in development for 3.5 years before that. So you want to take a look at what you already have going on, what your competitors are doing, how the market's changing, and you need to be able to pivot on those opportunities. We've provided historical proof and case studies to explain why it makes sense to spend marketing dollars in a recession, and we've talked about the 6 areas you can focus on to maximize that investment. Now let's talk about making the case for that marketing budget. Getting budget approval and buy-in is the same as selling to your customers. You need to show the value that they're going to receive in return. To do that, you need to have a solid plan. To get your organization, and more specifically the executive team, approving the budget, there's 4 things you should do when making the case for your marketing budget. The first step in making your case is to review the plan to confirm it aligns with the company's strategic goals and business plan. Then frame your ask against this and use the data to support your proposal. Also make note of any of the concerns you've heard. As you move through the budget presentation, revisit each of these concerns. Is there a way to address them or mitigate them? How can you and where can you proactively address the concerns that you've heard? When making your case for more budget, you want to use data to tell the story. Statistics will likely be received better than raw numbers, and trends with hard evidence are better than hypotheses or best guesses. Use your data when you can and rely on historical industry data, like what we presented here today, to fill in the gaps. And don't be afraid to explain to the executive team what will happen if you don't make this investment. I'm not a big fan of scare tactics, but sometimes you have to pull out the big guns. You want to make sure you connect your request to the changing marketplace. Be aware of the changing market conditions and then make sure you've connected your requests to them. Remember the customer research you did to create your pivot strategy? You want to share that information with the team to discuss possible changes in customer behaviors based on survey data, as well as your historical data and your industry forecasts. Just as important, look at what your customers are doing. And never underestimate the fear of missing out. No one wants to be left out. Sometimes just the hint of being surpassed or outdone by a competitor is enough to loosen the purse strings. And finally, your strategy should have a specific budget number, a way to measure progress and success and an anticipated outcome. You want to be very clear about what the resources will allow you to accomplish. Make sure the metrics proposed are relevant to the people you're proposing the budget to. Whenever possible, tie it back to the specific business outcomes. It's hard to say no when your ask directly contributes to a strategic goal. It's easy to get wrapped up in what you need, but at the end of the day, your organization is focused on outcomes. Make that connection for them. And make sure they're timely, both in your implementation and when you anticipate seeing results. At this point, I think I've made a pretty strong case that neglecting marketing efforts during a recession can weaken a brand and make it less profitable in the long run. And while we've reviewed how to make the business case to allocate for more budget and how to structure that budget to maximize ROI, I know that some of you are still going to be forced to make budget cuts. When costs must be reduced, it needs to happen strategically. Brands that take a scalpel to the budget and nimbly adjust tactics are more likely to recover after a recession than those that take a cleaver to the marketing budget. Regardless of whether your marketing budget stays the same or gets reduced during a recession, you will need to change how and where you allocate your budget. The exact plan for pivoting will depend on you and your organization and the answer to the opportunity and threat questions that we went over earlier. The market and your competition will both play a role in how and where you pivot. When budget cuts are inevitable, these are the areas you should focus on first. You want to do your research. You may not have budget for a full industry survey, but you can use your own data and to identify trends and patterns. And you can look to industry experts. Publications and trade organizations are running their own surveys. Use that information to create a plan based on data, not your gut. And again, keep an eye on the competition. Are they cutting back? If so, you may have a chance to take advantage of less expensive share of voice to drive growth during that recovery period. You want to make sure you align on your objectives. Do you know what the organization wants to accomplish? Are you trying to influence perception? Are you trying to generate awareness? Or are you looking for down funnel activity and lead generation? The definition of success is going to change in a recession. By aligning on sales, marketing, and leadership's expectations, you can reallocate those resources to meet those objectives. And again, tie them back in your presentation, and you have a higher chance of getting that budget approved. You're going to want to review your segmentation and look for untapped audiences. People's behaviors change in a recession. An audience that may have been your primary focus in 2022 may need to take the back burner to an untapped audience with more potential given the changing behaviors in a recession. Now, I'm not saying you cut advertising to your initial segment. A brand nurturing program can help maintain share of voice with your customer base while also offering some additional marketing budget to explore an untapped audience. Where do you find those untapped audiences? It's going to be in your data. You want to make sure you audit your content. Run a quick audit to, at the very least, make sure none of your message is off given the current economic climate. You want to make sure you fine-tune your campaigns. There is no room for waste in a recession. And while optimizing your marketing program should always be part of your strategy, now is the time to really buckle down. This doesn't mean just cutting the programs with the highest cost per click or the highest cost per lead, but it means aligning on the objectives and the KPIs and making optimizations to improve those metrics. If you can't, and those funds would be better served elsewhere, don't be afraid to reallocate them. You want to introduce or expand your email program, and you want to add or increase programmatic budget. Both of these are cost-effective ways to stay in front of your audience. Email is an owned property, so take advantage of it. If you don't have an email program, introduce one. If you have an email program, how can you expand it to create a more personalized experience? And if you're not using programmatic advertising, look into it. With programmatic advertising, you can be highly targeted and only present advertisements to the relevant audience that you're targeting. We've looked at how some of the world's most successful brands have used a recession to their advantage. And we've identified what these successful post-recession brands have in common. And we've looked at the 6 strategies to focus on to maximize your return. I talked about tips for making the case for your marketing budget and what to do when budget cuts are inevitable. I want to leave you with these key thoughts. Neglecting marketing during a recession can weaken a brand, making it less profitable in the long run. Maintaining your share of voice won't cut it. You must increase it. But that doesn't mean you have to increase the budget. Reallocating your resources may give you the boost you need. It all depends on your organization and your industry. Eventually, the recession will end, but that doesn't mean we're going to return to normal as we know it. Be prepared for possible long-term shifts in consumer values and attitudes. And if this feels hard and a little bit scary, it should. Every recession is different, and you are in poorly charted water because no 2 downturns are exactly alike. Marketing in a recession will never be easy because it goes against your instincts and all normal operating standards. But with a solid plan, you and your brand can come out ahead. What questions do we have?
Okay. Jesse asks if there is a general rule of thumb based on your company size on how much you should increase your spend if you want to take advantage of or increase your investment if you want to take advantage of a recession.
I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, you want to look at marketing effectiveness. You want to be smart. Just blanket increasing marketing spend isn't going to be the right choice. At the end of the day, you still have a balance sheet that you have to answer to. So you're going to want to look at how effective is each dollar that you're spending. And then you want to look at what's going on in your market and what's going on within your individual audience. If you see those opportunities, you're going to want to reallocate budget. But in terms of a rule of what that should specifically look like, I think it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
One of my, I'm going to say pet peeve, but one of my frustrations when talking to various marketers and executives is when marketing budget is tied to a percentage of revenue. Obviously, during a recession, revenue numbers go down. That's counter to what you're preaching here. So, what would be your message to the C-suite to reframe that?
Yeah, it's I think using the data to really tell the story of how this has happened in the past. I mean, I cited Peter Field's study, but you go online and there's I couldn't even include everything that I came across when I was working on this. I think the key is understanding that while this goes against everything that feels natural to us, we need to make sure that we're maintaining share of voice. And I think this is the key part. That doesn't necessarily mean having to increase your budget. There are things that will happen during a recession. The cost of advertising typically decreases. And I say typically because every recession is different. And with the way our world has gone in the last couple of years, who the heck knows what's going to happen? But typically, media is less expensive. And so in a lot of ways, you are able to take what you have spent before, that same advertising budget, and still increase the share of voice. That's what we're getting at. We need to make sure that we stay in front of these people. And again, having those KPIs up front that you guys have agreed on, those metrics of success of how you can tell, leading indicators if what you're trying to do is working, if you're maintaining that share of voice, if you're staying in front of your audience through impressions and engagements, brand sentiment, all of that is going to be data that you can use to prove that what you're doing is right, even if the sales aren't necessarily coming in.
Excellent. I have one more question, and then if anybody else could please post your questions in the chat now, or you're going to miss the opportunity here. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that it was really important to connect with your audience during a recession. Could you expand on that a little bit and why that's important?
Yeah, so the reason that we want to maintain this share of voice is we want to maintain share of mind with the consumer. And just because this consumers, the end users' purse strings may be tighter, it doesn't mean that they don't still have a need. And so when we use our message, we have the opportunity to use our messaging either through our paid advertising, through some of our owned properties, our social channels, our email, to really position ourselves as a resource to them. We all have, within our own industries, we all have our own level of expertise. And how can we use that content, or how can we use that to help provide support for them? At some point, they're going to start buying again. We want to make sure we keep that connection with them. And one of the ways that we can do that is through that content, by, again, using the research to figure out what their pain points are, what they're feeling, and then pivoting our content to be able to meet those needs and stay top of mind.
Excellent. Robin asks, what tools or resources do you use or do we have available to investigate the market share of competitors?
Ooh, Steve, I'm going to defer to you on that one because you are our expert on competitive research.
It depends on your size or scale. So if you're large enough that you're competing with the bigger boys in your industry, there are places you can purchase that data pretty effectively or easily. If you are smaller or in a very fragmented industry, you're best off falling back to other proxies for market share, and what might even be better leading indicators of your market position and your competitors' market position, such as branded search is one of my favorite data points for that, for being able to get a handle on where you sit competitively, how many people are searching for your brand versus your competitors. I think that's it for questions today. But I want to, first of all, thank Elizabeth for putting this together, this fabulous data-driven presentation here, and encourage all of you, if you do have further questions you didn't want to express in a more public venue, to follow up with Elizabeth on the email address on the slide.
Thank you for joining us.